Hey everyone, Jesse Paul here. Welcome to another Colorado Sun event. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you here. I'm going to do just a very brief introduction because we got a special guest who's joining us at the top who wasn't on the normal agenda. We have Senate President Steve Fenberg who's agreed to give us 15 minutes before he has to run to an event. Hopefully he can unmute and we can see him here so we can jump right in. But he's a Boulder Democrat leading the Senate Democratic Caucus and leading a larger majority than he was maybe expecting. So thanks so much for joining us, Senator. Can you hear us?
Hey, Jesse. Yeah.
How you doing? Well, thanks. I see you're still at the Capitol, so I'm lucky to have made it home. So let's just jump right in. We got about 15 minutes here before I got to let you go. I want to talk first about your opening day speech. You touched on so many subjects, but two of the big ones were increasing abortion access in Colorado and also, bolstering some of the gun control measures in the state. Can you talk a little bit about what those specifically are going to look like? You talked about them in broad strokes, but do you guys have ideas about how exactly to accomplish those goals?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on. I know I'm pitch hitting for the governor, but I'm not offended, Jesse. But I know, in all seriousness, I do appreciate the invite. And it's always good to chat. And, look, we live in a very interesting time when it comes to abortion access and reproductive rights. I think the best way to describe it is people are anxious about what's happened, but especially what's coming next, knowing that the Supreme Court that has made some of these decisions is still there and is very much an active court. So here in Colorado, I think we first and foremost want to just make sure we are protecting the right to an abortion and protecting reproductive health care, because we know the voters and Coloradans generally support that. They have told us repeatedly at the ballot box. I think in a lot of ways, they told us that this past election based on the outcomes of a lot of the races. And so we obviously passed a very big bill, a very monumental bill last year, the Reproductive Health Equity Act, that kind of locks in and statute some of those protections. This year, now, I think we are looking at some of maybe the more nuanced pieces of the puzzle. We want to ensure that as Colorado continues to be the sort of safe haven for folks all over the region, that we are protecting people who come here from out of state, that we're protecting providers that provide care. And also we are wanting to protect our providers that maybe provide services in other places. So there's still a lot to be figured out on exactly how we are going to do that, but we intend to do everything within our power to make sure that we're not only protecting access, but we're protecting the folks who provide these services, et cetera. But there's a lot of different aspects of it. We're really just kind of starting to look into a lot of the different pieces, and we're still drafting potential policies. So nothing to unveil exactly just yet, but making sure everybody who needs access has it, whether it's looking at, how the insurance industry is providing access to folks, whether it's making sure that there aren't threats of folks feeling like that they're not going to provide their services because they're afraid of legal implications, whether it's in the state of Colorado or elsewhere. So it's all encompassing. We want to do everything we can to protect the rights of people who provide those services, et cetera. And a whole lot more to come, but I suspect that there will be a number of bills on reproductive rights, not just abortion access, but also reproductive health care in general. On the other topic you asked about on guns, I think it was, look, we have made a lot of progress, I think, in the last several years. The debate has evolved. I think people's opinions has evolved. I think that's partially because of the shocking tragedies that have plagued our state and frankly this country for far too long. But I also think people have gotten a little more sophisticated and understand exactly what we're talking about. We are not talking about complete assault on the Second Amendment. We are not talking about taking away people's firearms that are law-abiding citizens. We are talking about providing basic public safety. People should be able to go to a movie theater or the grocery store or to school and not fear for their lives. And I think a lot of people live in that unfortunate situation now. So the way I think about gun violence prevention is sort of that Swiss cheese approach. There's not one policy that is going to solve the problem. I think we all know that. It's multifaceted. And the approach should be that we have several policies that kind of layer on each other. And the hope is that eventually you get to a place where fewer holes line up. And that means fewer tragedies, and fewer people are taking their own lives, and fewer people are committing acts of violence with a gun. And I think we're well on our way, but of course, there's a whole lot more work to do. We want to improve the ERPO policy that we have on the books to make that more effective, make sure people know about it and that they're using it, and that it's potentially available to more people to file those cases. We want to look at potentially waiting periods or age requirements for certain types of firearms. What I've said is everything should be on the table when you're talking about life or death. And we very much are talking about that. We're talking about thousands of lives over the last few years have been taken because of gun violence. And so everything should be on the table, and we should prioritize from there based on one single factor, which is it going to save more lives?
Okay, so let's unpack some of those things. Talking specifically first about abortion access in Colorado, one of the big conversations has been that there's a lot of folks coming from other states. A lot of surrounding states have banned abortion access or are in the process of it. Thinking about Utah, Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the legislation would be to increase providers or make it easier for people to, provide abortion care in Colorado? Is that part of what's on the table here?
It's a good question. I think it's a little bit TBD. To be honest, these are bills that are being worked on by folks in our caucuses that really are the experts, and they are working with the outside advocates and experts. I'm not sure that the policy will be about increasing providers. Maybe there are ways to do that without, the state actually kind of directly being involved in that realm. I think in a lot of ways it's about access. And if there's increased access, then there will have to be more providers. I think we know there has to be more providers. I think providers are already looking at expanding because we have long waits now, because we're not just providing these services to Coloradans, but there's a lot of people that are coming here from out of state, like you said. So right. I don't know all the ins and outs of exactly what will happen in terms of providing support or direction for more providers. I do get the sense that is happening. And if there's a role that the state should or can play, I think everyone in our caucus is willing to listen and play that role if it's the appropriate place for us.
Okay. On gun control or gun violence prevention, talk to me about, you and I have talked a lot about the idea of an assault weapons ban in Colorado after the Boulder Cooper shooting. I know that was something that you supported, but also recognize that, the rest of the Democratic legislature might not be there. We know that Representative Elizabeth Epps and Andrew Basenecker and then Senator Rhonda Fields in the Senate are working on this legislation. I haven't seen your name attached to it. How feasible do you think it is to get this done? I know it's so incredibly complicated with the technical aspects of what kind of guns would fall under such a ban and what wouldn't. And obviously, there's questions about whether the governor would be on board and whether you guys can get the Democratic votes in the chambers. Where do you think that stands? And are you still kind of on the same idea that it's worth pursuing?
Look, I guess to take a really quick step back, what I would say, I would reiterate what I said a few moments ago, which is all I am interested in on this topic is it going to be a policy that's effective, and is it going to result in more lives being saved? I think this is a policy, an assault weapons ban is a policy that, my knee-jerk response will always be yes, because personally, I don't think weapons of war need to be out there on the streets, because I think they can have such a devastating impact. And I think they can have a devastating impact so fast, and the volume can be so large in terms of the lives that they kill. With that said, our job is to pass policy, not just support an idea or not. And like you said, I think there are some complications with exactly how to make that policy effective. Personally, again, if there's a bill, I would vote for it. I haven't seen the draft that you referenced. I know it's, been circulating, I guess, in some circles. I haven't seen it. My sense is we should prioritize based on what we think is going to be the most effective, and not from a political perspective, what is going to be the most vulnerable. I guess I mean more like, I don't want this to be taken out of context, because I am not one of the people that says like, oh, remember what happened in 2013, don't go too far. My nuanced approach to it is it worth it? Or is it gonna create a lot of misinformation? And is it gonna make people read into conspiracies and feel like we are doing something that at the end of the day we are not, and is making us lose the message and maybe lose the sort of argument around what effective gun violence prevention can be in Colorado. What I would say though is something like an assault weapons ban can be effective. I don't want folks to think that I'm saying a policy like that can't be effective. There maybe needs to be other pieces put in place before that type of policy would be as effective as it could be. But again, I think you have to acknowledge that there is an obscene amount of assault weapons already out there. And obviously, whatever we do in one state is not going to change what somebody does right across the border. So is it at the very top of the list of what I think probably is the most effective policy we can pass to save lives? Probably not. But with that said, again, I support it. But it is what the press wants to talk about. Well, it is what Rocky Mountain gun owners wants to talk about. Yeah. And I get it. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. It's just, for me, it just has to be based on science and data and what is actually going to result in the best policy to save lives.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point. I mean, in defense of the press, reading through the bill, it would be a pretty big change to Colorado law, to especially the one that the bill as circulated. I understand that that's changing, and we're going to write about that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And one of the most interesting conversations I've had on this is with Senator Tom Sullivan, whose son Alex was killed in the Aurora Theater shooting by an AR-15, which would be classified as an assault weapon under this legislation. He's not necessarily even supportive of this. One of the strongest gun violence prevention, mm-hmm. gun regulation voices in the legislature because of what you said, right? Like there's interstate issues and all that arising. So, all right, we got time for one more question because I know you got to get to an event, and I'll ask with a reader question because I think this kind of is something that you guys are talking a lot about. One of our readers was asking, with increased property taxes, increased high density development, it's pushing working families out of our communities. What is the legislature doing to respond? And I know you got like 30 seconds, so go for it.
Well, look, I think housing is going to be one of the biggest issues of this session. And I think it was a big issue last year. Last year was a little bit less about policy and more about financial investments. We did pass a bill, though, that I think is interesting and probably gives a little bit of a path on where we're headed, which was a bill that provided incentives for local governments to ease up on some of their zoning and policies and other areas that are seen as barriers to developing more housing. And so that's the crux of the debate, and it's a tough one. Because traditionally local governments have kind of complete control over zoning and land use issues, which really is at the crux of housing. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I'm a big supporter of local control in general. I think the issue has this issue gotten so bad that it is more of a city by city issue? Is it more regional and maybe even statewide? And if so, what role does the state or regions have in making sure that we don't wake up one day and realize that we've turned into San Francisco and it's too late to make any changes? It is so much easier, so much more effective, better for people, better for the environment, air quality, congestion, et cetera, if we can address some of these policies now rather than 10 years from now, which I think is kind of the challenge California is facing. You can't duplex or ADU your way out of the problem. But it's better if you kind of incentivize or relax rules to allow for that now rather than 10 years from now. And then likewise, if you develop land around transit corridors with warehouses or storage centers, it's going to be much more difficult down the road to turn those into dense housing, which is really where you want dense housing. So I think that's going to be the debate, is what do we as a state do to ensure that more housing is being developed, and it's the right type of housing that isn't just mandated affordable housing where you have to income qualify, but also isn't just what the tippy top of the market can bear in building luxury condos, but is actually building housing that is available and needed just by regular people. Colorado is not keeping up with our population. And I think we could put up a wall and say we're full, no more people, but that's not going to happen. People want to keep living here. This is a great place to be. And I think it's on us as policymakers to make sure that it continues to be a great place to live, raise a family, start a business, et cetera. And a big impediment right now is housing. So it's on us to start to solve this problem. And I do think we're going to make some real headway this session.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I know we went over a little bit, so I hope your staff isn't yelling at me, but thank you
No
again
worries.
for joining us in last minute. Have fun at your event tonight, and I know we'll talk to you a lot throughout the session. So thanks.
Cool.
Thanks,
well, thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it.
All right. So moving on, we got a great rest of the program here for you guys. Let me reintroduce myself and kind of just give you the top line stuff that we're doing here. So I'm Jesse Paul. I'm a political reporter and editor here at the Colorado Sun. Thank you again for joining us for our 2023 legislative preview event. We're really excited to have you. We've got a great lineup of 4 lawmakers who are getting ready to talk to you. We got Senators Cleave, Simpson, a Republican from R-Alamosa, Senator Rachel Zenzinger, a Democrat from R-Arvada, and then House Speaker Julie McCluskie and Assistant House Minority Leader Rose Pugliese going to join us. I want to thank our sponsor for tonight's event, Aponte and Bussam Public Affairs. And they've been great supporters of our political events here at the Sun. And the other great supporters of the political events here at the Sun are our Colorado Sun readers who make every single one of these events possible. Couldn't do it without them. If you want to get more information, get more Colorado Sun access, get the unaffiliated newsletter, which is our Tuesday and Friday politics newsletter, kind of pulling back the scenes on what's going on at the Capitol. You can join. It's quick and easy at coloradosun.com/join. coloradosun.com/unaffiliated will get you right to the unaffiliated page, so you can get quick and easy access over there. I will say that we will have plenty on the assault weapons ban and the conversation around that in the unaffiliated on Friday. So if you're interested in that topic in particular, I encourage you to sign up. I know there was one question that came in before I could get Senator Fenberg to answer it about, the draft of the legislation. I'll just say that, that is not the final version of the bill. And we got a little bit more information on it today. We're kind of working on gathering, what the legislation is going to look like and when it's going to come out. And again, more on that will be in the unaffiliated. So as the Senate President mentioned, we don't have the governor tonight. He's been to every single one of our Colorado Sun events in prior years. So we are bummed out to not have him, but this was his inauguration week. He was out late last night at his inaugural ball at the Mission Ballroom in Denver. You can read up on that and his inauguration speech, but he did thankfully provide us with some recorded remarks that we can kind of dissect and maybe ask rhetorical questions to. So I think we have that queued up. We can go ahead and play it now.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Colorado Sun for hosting this annual event. And of course, thank you, Colorado Sun, for your commitment to reporting on the issues and policies that matter most to Coloradans. I wish I could be with you in person today, but I wanted to take the chance to share some of my key priorities for the upcoming legislative session, the main topic for tonight. We've done a lot of work over the last 4 years of my first term, and as I head into my second term in the coming session, we also know that there's challenges we face and more work ahead. We're focused on tackling skyrocketing housing costs and really making sure that there's housing options for every person's budget in Colorado, for rent and for purchase. And that means working with our legislature to really create a solution that works for our state. The housing crisis is truly a statewide issue. We also need to do it in a way that has a positive impact on climate, on water, on clean air, and make sure we do that the right way to make housing more affordable. I'm also focused on making Colorado one of the 10 safest states. Last year, we took an important first step to support local law enforcement with the bipartisan public safety package. We want to build on that work this year with another package to crack down on auto theft, provide more support to recruit and retain law enforcement, improve school safety, and support community organizations that are working to prevent crime from happening in the first place. We're also looking to continue saving homeowners and property owners money through additional property tax relief. No one should be forced out of their home just because of their increased property tax bill. And on top of that relief, I also look forward to working with the legislature on a long-term solution to help more Coloradans hold on to more of their hard-earned money, to replace Gallagher with a mechanism that works for our state. Those are just some of our priorities. I look forward to working with legislators, Republican and Democratic, to make Colorado a better place for everyone. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the event.
All right, so a lot of that is what we heard in the governor's inaugural address, but I do want to unpack some of it because I think it is kind of important. So first of all, talking about focus on making Colorado one of the 10 safest states, that's probably one of the more interesting things that the governor has talked about tonight and in his inaugural address, but he hasn't really said exactly how he plans to do that. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for the legislature this year. And you heard some of this from the Senate president. They don't really have a great lineup of bills lined up. If I had 15 more minutes with the Senate president, we would have talked maybe more about how a third of the legislature this year is new. And that really presents a situation in which, people are kind of drafting bills for the first time or don't necessarily have the experience that the lawmakers or lobbyists who've been around for decades have. And I think you're seeing that reflected in some of the lack of policy coming out early. The one other interesting thing on, the safest states or safest safety focused legislation is that I think it's going to clash really significantly with some of the more progressive new lawmakers, especially in the House. The governor has talked about the need to, increase criminal penalties for some crimes. And I think there are definitely several folks in the House who don't want to see that happen. And I think he's going to be challenged in terms of, trying to get that passed, and there could be some conflicts there. That's my puppy, Bonnie. And then on property taxes, quite a couple questions that people have asked already, some of the readers. And if you have questions throughout the night, please submit them at questions@coloradosun.com. I get them right here on my iPad, so I can ask the lawmakers when they join us here in a couple more minutes. But on the property tax front, the governor has proposed spending an extra $200 million in property tax relief. That's on top of the $700 million in relief that the legislature set aside last year for the 2023 and 24 tax years. But this is really just like a perennial issue in Colorado, and the governor hasn't suggested a long-term fix, only that one should be come up with. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest issues that's hanging over the legislature this year. And we'll hear a little bit more about that from the lawmakers later. But this problem with when voters repealed the Gallagher Amendment in 2020, property tax rates or bills have been going up significantly because home values have gone up just since the pandemic. Anybody who's shopped for a home or looked for a home knows that. And certainly it's an issue that lawmakers are trying to figure out. But a long-term fix has been pretty elusive because it's just a really complicated, touchy issue with a lot of ideas on both sides. And then on the skyrocketing housing costs area, we talked to Senator Fenberg about this in terms of zoning, and we'll also see probably a rent control bill at the legislature this session, one that would let local governments enact rent control issues. But the things that were interesting that the governor didn't talk about tonight are the same things that he didn't talk about during his inaugural address yesterday. And I think they're really kind of glaring omissions, and namely around no mention of abortion access, which is clearly a priority for Senator Fenberg and Speaker McCluskie, who's going to be on later, and then no mention of gun control or gun regulations. So, where the governor stands on those, I think I would like to do an interview with him to talk about those different topics, particularly the assault weapons issue. And we know that it's not something that he's vocally supported. It doesn't seem to be something he's super interested in, and oftentimes the governor makes very clear, where his policy priorities stand. So I think that's something to really watch. And then clashes on the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. We'll get into that just in a few minutes here too with Senator Zenzinger. She's got an interesting bill on that. And again, I think the session really has, we'll have extra meeting for the governor, especially as with all the rumors given his potential presidential ambitions. I think we wrote in a newsletter that I think I wrote in a newsletter, so I'll take ownership of it, that it's probably a better than 50% chance that he runs if President Biden decides not to run for re-election. And you could kind of see that throughout the inauguration festivities. He's starting to act more presidential, look maybe a little bit more like he's looking forward or looking toward the future. So we're definitely going to be paying attention to that on the sessions, throughout the session. So it's going to be an interesting year, and we'll definitely bring you some interviews, and I'm hoping to get the governor on our podcast to kind of answer some of these big questions, but we'll certainly hear from him. So moving on now, we have our lawmakers getting queued up. I see Senator Simpson is ready, and I'll go ahead and introduce him. Senator Zenzinger is going to join us in a moment. She's also at an event tonight, so she's going to pop out. So Senator Cleave Simpson, an R-Alamosa Republican. He's also a native of the San Luis Valley and a Colorado rancher and farmer. So he brings us kind of a different perspective than we often get from the metro area. He's in a really interesting position because he was drawn into a different district during last year's redistricting process. So he used to represent kind of Southeast Colorado and the San Luis Valley, and now he represents Southwest Colorado and the San Luis Valley in a district that's actually a little bit more Democratic leaning. So we'll ask him about that and how that maybe changes things for him. So now he's representing the Durango area, La Plata County, Montezuma County, also represents Montrose, San Juan, Ouray counties. So it's a big shift. I've always joked, I joked with your predecessor, Senator, that I think I've joked with you that I think you need a plane to go to your district, not a car, because you have so many different places to cover. So let's just jump in. I'll give you a couple minutes here to talk about what your legislative priorities are going to be this session, and we'll jump into questions while we're waiting for Senator Zenzinger.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. It's a privilege to be here. Appreciate the Sun putting this together. My first endeavor in this space. Only in my third session as a state legislator. So it's been quite an experience and a wonderful opportunity to represent rural Colorado. You kind of highlighted, got elected to represent Senate District 35. And because of redistricting in the census now, I guess officially like Monday, now I represent Senate District 6, but it's still largely rural Colorado. It's still largely agriculture dominated. The issues don't change drastically from Southeast Colorado to Southwest Colorado. Some of the political affiliation and discussions do shift a little bit, but I'm really honored and privileged to represent Senate District 6 going forward. So was a little challenge last summer trying to still represent folks all the way out to Hawley and Springfield, but yet start to try to get introduced and engaged in Durango and Cortez and Natarita and Nucla. And so it was quite a challenge for me this last summer, but here we go. From I think about a Republican perspective, the caucus is really focused on, we haven't changed our focus about the things that are impacting and affecting Coloradans, the affordability. The state's largely, as the governor kind of touched on it, it's become an unsafe place to live. So there should be a tremendous focus about shifting that paradigm and not taking 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years to impact that, and to become the one of the top 10 safest places to live is going to take a tremendous effort, given kind of how we've changed over the last 4 or 5 years. So, and then for me, Jesse, I have this direct connection to water. I manage the Rio Grande Water Conservation District in the San Luis Valley. I farm and ranch, as you pointed out. I'm uniquely qualified, one of the very few legislators up here that actually owns a water right. So very sensitive to the challenges. And it really, that was a lot of what motivated me to run for office. Was you could see the writing on the wall that, the climate in this state is changing, and that it isn't a drought anymore. This is truly the aridification of the West. Rio Grande Basin is just a classic example of that. This is nearly 20 straight years now in a row, minus one really exceptional year in 2019 that, runoff is historically below average. So the Colorado River system, and rightfully so, gets an abundance of attention in that water space, and very visible the declines in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. but the whole state, there are challenges across every basin in the state when it comes to water. I can think it's only been about a year since, the governor of Nebraska announced, their intention to spend up to $500 million to build a diversion on the South Platte in Colorado and a canal and divert that water into Nebraska that, got an abundance of attention. And you just work your way around the state, and the Republican River and compact challenges there, the Arkansas River, the Rio Grande, Colorado, all those places, that water discussion. And look, I touched on it. It's a lot of what motivated me to run for office, and that how this state deals with dwindling supplies and ever-growing demands. You just run the risk of fundamentally changing what Colorado looks like. And for me, that means rural Colorado. I was very fortunate enough to represent, counties down the Arkansas Valley, and Crowley County, one of them, and routinely is kind of highlighted historically how not to manage those water challenges, where, Crowley County historically had about 50,000 irrigated acres, and in the 70s and 80s, for a number of reasons and circumstances, gave up an abundance of their water. And today they have about 5,000 irrigated acres. And again, that's a little bit of a, example of how not to manage this really significant challenge going forward. So again, for me, ag and water and natural resources really rise to the top, but it's really about rural Colorado, whether it's access to healthcare, whether it's veterans issues, higher education. I served on the board of trustees at Adams State University for several years, and have a unique perspective and appreciation for what those institutions, what they mean, particularly to rural Colorado, Fort Lewis and Western, and even Mesa to some degree, and how connected the communities are to those institutions. So no lack of challenges in front of us from a statewide perspective. And then again, for me, kind of more narrowly focused in my district and my field of expertise.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thanks, Senator Zenzinger. I see she just jumped on. Just a reintroduction of her. Senator Zenzinger is an Arvada Democrat. She's also chair of the Joint Budget Committee, so she pulls the budget strings at the Capitol these days. And thanks for joining us. I know you're getting the Iron Skillet Award from the Colorado Restaurant Association tonight, which sounds tasty. So
yeah.
Can you give us a couple minutes about what your legislative priorities are this year and what you're going to be focusing on at the legislature?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I do apologize for being on my phone, but I am at the Restaurant Association. They actually just started the program, so my daughter is going to accept the award on my behalf. So, and speaking of children and kids, my priorities this year are pretty typical. It's going to be education funding. I'm going to be focusing again on special education funding, on foster youth. In transition, I have a bill that's going to focus on better supporting our nursing homes. And then something that I've been hearing quite a bit from my community, I have a bill that's going to tackle auto thefts this year.
So Senator Zenzinger, let's start off with you, since I have you unmuted. Can you talk to me a little bit about the budget situation in the state? We've written a lot about it at the Colorado Sun. The legislature has about $1 billion more to spend this year than it did last year, but a lot of that's being eaten up by inflation. The Tabor cap is lagging in terms of the inflation rate, so you guys don't have as much money as what would reflect quite what the inflationary pressures are on the budget now. And then the governor, came out with this budget that offered like $15 million, and that's it for legislative priorities. Talk about the situation you're in. Is there going to be any money for the legislature to spend this year? And how are you guys going to kind of shake all that out?
It's definitely going to be a much more modest budget year. And you touched on all the highlights. First of all, we don't have the one-time extraordinary funding from the federal government that we've had in the past couple of years. We have record high inflation, a lot of cost pressures. When we put the budget together last year, it was based on a certain set of assumptions, and it turns out that we were not exactly accurate with those assumptions. It turns out that it was a little bit tougher than we even expected. So it looks like we have like $1 billion over the excess in our budget, but that's over the Tabor cap. Under the Tabor cap, we just have to try and do more with less.
And are you guys looking, does that mean making cuts to existing spending plans, or does it mean, maybe doing half of what the governor asked in terms of, for instance, $200 million in property tax relief takes a lot out of the budget. Do you think that all of that's going to happen in the end?
Right now, everything is on the table, but it'll probably end up being a combination. I think that the Joint Budget Committee right now, the sense that I have from my colleagues is that we want to take care of what we believe to be the basic functions of government. And we want to make sure that the citizens of Colorado are being taken care of. And that's going to be very costly to take last year's budget and carry it forward this year with all of the mandatory increases that we're going to have to do because of inflation and population and whatnot. But we're going to try our best. But we are definitely going to have to figure out what that balance is. And I think it will mean that we can't do a bunch of extraordinary spending, pilot programs, things like that this year. I just don't think the budget can allow for that. We're just going to have to be a little bit more frugal.
Senator Simpson, kind of shifting back to you, one of the things that the governor wants to spend money on is water conservation efforts. And there's been a lot of talk from Democrats about what water conservation, that they want to do water conservation work, but there hasn't been specifics. And, there's been talk out there about, restricting potentially even what farmers and ranchers can grow or use. I know there's been talk about alfalfa and, how water intensive it is in parts of Colorado. And, is that the best use of water resources? Where do you see the water conservation conversation beginning in Colorado? And does it include maybe, restricting certain crops or certain uses for water?
Jesse, look, the kind of structure is there to have this conversation. So Russ George was really instrumental years ago in Water for the 21st Century Act and establishing basin roundtables, interbasin compact committees that all report up to Colorado Water Conservation Board. And this is a classic example of where local communities know best how to work in this space. And we're just, we're now finalizing the update to the Colorado Water Plan, where those basins have, put their input into working through these challenges and this shortage. I really, and look, I'm a farmer and a rancher. I have an 800-acre irrigated farm, and I raise alfalfa, the most water consumptive use crop we can raise. But it's all the capital investment. That's what my dad did. That's what my grandpa did. That's what my great grandpa did. Trying to, figure out a different crop is challenging, and the capital investment, and maybe there's space in there for assistance and helps. Look, the federal government's, intimately involved in this conversation as well, particularly recognizing the challenges in the Colorado River system. But for me, like me personally, in my example, I have a 31-year-old son who's the 5th generation of my family to farm and ranch, and he's managing my farm for me today. He and I are having these conversations about, given, the factors that are impacting us around water in particular, I don't know that we can keep farming the same way we have, Jesse, for decades. So to that end, he and I raised 50 acres of hemp this year. Now, we raised hemp for just for the fiber, not the CBD oil or the seed for oil or kind of some of the shiny things other folks have been chasing over the years, but just for fiber. So I know I raised it on half of the water as my alfalfa crop would. I don't know yet. I can't say for certainty that the economics work out, but what I have it contracted to be processed for and how I grew it and my inputs, there's a real chance it has an opportunity, but the proof is still in the pudding, and whether we can make that work and then transition. And then, particularly, I think about my farm, And if I can figure out how to be more self-sufficient on my farm, can we take that and expand it to my community? And then can you expand it to the state, given all the challenges that particular agriculture has faced and the challenges in the state around water. So it's, and for me in the San Luis Valley, it's not just about hemp, it's quinoa, it's CSU extension working on trying to develop other crops that we can raise that are economically viable, that that really help us in that space around the gap in water supply and demand.
Let me ask you one more water question from one of our readers. Obviously there's been so much talk about how with water rights, there's a lot of pressure on those who have them to use them. And obviously Congress has set aside a few $1 billion to help pay farmers, not to use their water. Do you feel like that's a long-term solution? And, does the state have a role in this, or is this a federal government?
It's a little of both. Certainly the federal government, the system conservation program that was tried on the Colorado River system 3 or 4 years ago is, being reinvigorated. I think Senator Hickenlooper was really instrumental in finding some funding to help do that. It boils down to economics, but I think about where I live and the challenges we have and where we've invested, our own resources, time, energy, and dollars, over the last decade to over 70 or 80 million dollars to try to resolve we don't have a Lake Powell or a Lake Mead in the Rio Grande Basin, but we do have a very, very prolific underground aquifer that we monitor and measure and watch, and it's very well correlated to the decline in Lake Powell. So we've been trying to work on improvements in irrigation efficiency, can make some incremental improvements in our water usage. Different crops will make, again, some improvement. Ultimately, I think the Rio Grande Basin is a microcosm of what's happening in Colorado and the rest of the Western US, that ultimately there will be less irrigated acres in my community because there's just not a supply. Our economy, our culture, our communities were all built around irrigated agriculture, that we just don't have the same supply. So kind of on a side note, in another discussion, Jesse, I'm working on some conversation around agrivoltaics and the ability to do renewable energy, particularly solar, and not just completely eliminate productive agriculture. And is there a space there for that? And particularly for me in the San Luis Valley, I'll put a plug in that it's like the premier place in Colorado for solar generation. It's 8,000 foot of elevation, flat, less than 7 inches of precipitation a year, and we have some other infrastructure challenges that we need to work on and engage in about before you kind of make this transition and not a complete transition. Again, talk about we don't have enough water supply to continue what we've been doing. So Mother Nature will drive this, and our actions, our proactive actions, will mitigate as much of that as we can. So again, challenging times for rural Colorado, particularly those parts of the state like mine that depend on agriculture as its primary economic driver. But again, I'll highlight the kind of process, the infrastructure, the basin roundtables are the place to have these discussions and work through those challenges.
Yeah, you're in an interesting spot because you represent two difficult basins in the Rio Grande and the Colorado. So I wouldn't want to have your job. So Senator Zenzinger, we're talking about water, obviously a big issue. Let's talk about another big issue, education funding. A lot of the reader comments and questions that have come in for us tonight have been around, long-term sources for education funding in Colorado. And you and I talked a little bit today about a bill that you're working on that's starting over in the House with Representative Kathy Kipp that would eliminate Colorado's Tabor refunds, with the exception of the property tax repayments for local governments, to send the rest of the money to the underfunded education system in Colorado. Teacher pay is low. We know that the budget stabilization factor, negative factor, still exists. Talk to me about your thinking on that legislation, which has prompted some response. And if you think that there's other things that the legislature can be doing or outside of the legislature to get kind of a permanent dedicated funding source for education.
So it's really supposed to be a conversation starter, and I think that it did its job in that regard because we have people talking about education funding now. I think that it's definitely not the solution, and we know that. This is not a sustainable revenue source. And then also being on the Joint Budget Committee, I've received a number of forecasts that say that we're not going to have a Tabor surplus from, in the near future. We are definitely looking at a looming recession. And so this would only kick in if there is a Tabor refund year. But I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that we pay our teachers so low in Colorado that we have a 3,000 teacher shortage. And in the past, we've been able to kind of make that up through temporary positions or expediting licensing. After the pandemic, we were not able to make those up. So, after a 3,000 teacher shortage back in 2020, we were able to fill a majority of those positions, leaving about 100 that just went unfilled. After the pandemic, we had a 3,000, 4,000 teacher shortage, and we were not able to fill any of them. So you cannot deliver a good education if you don't have qualified teachers. So, again, I recognize this is not a sustainable funding source, and I do believe that there are efforts down at the Capitol around that, but we felt that it was really important that we stand by our teachers, make a significant splashy stand that says that we see that this is a huge problem and that we need to do something about it. And we'll just kind of see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and you're a former teacher yourself, right? So you know this issue better than other people. And I think it's one of the things that's interesting is that, people, I know at the Capitol this happens, maybe not outside of it, but affordable housing is tied to education, to teacher pay. Erica Brunlin, our education reporter, has written stories about teachers who live in vans in the high country.
Yes.
I can't imagine doing that before going camping, let alone, having to wake up and teach kids in the morning. Another question on this bill, oftentimes you're known as one of the more bipartisan lawmakers in the legislature, but this is one where you're not working with a Republican. And I think that's an indication, right, of how strongly you feel about this issue. Can you just talk a little bit more about, the conversation that you want to start? Do you feel like the legislature's been maybe stalled on this so much that it needs kind of the kick in the pants that this bill has provided?
Does, yes. So I am very proud of my 100% bipartisan record, and I've had a 100% bipartisan record every year that I've been in the legislature on all of my bills. So it gives me a certain level of heartburn to think about how I might not have that kind of support this year on one bill, but you are correct. I am a teacher, and education, I've been beating this drum for 10 years, trying to highlight the deficiencies within our educational system. And I feel just very strongly that this is our moment to try and make a stand, and hopefully we'll convince some people. I've heard the criticism that I hear is that, oh, this is anti-Tabor. Actually, we're doing exactly what Tabor requires of us, which is we have an idea and we're going to put it on the ballot. And we're going to ask the voters, what do you think about this idea? And they may embrace it and they may reject it. We don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that sometimes people don't remember, right? Tabor provides the mechanism to ask voters these questions, and ultimately, they decide in 2019, they decided not to do something similar with Proposition CC, but
right.
You can ask them as many times as you want. I'll add one more comment on this just for fairness' sake. Obviously, Democrats, and we wrote about this today, but Democrats, celebrated Tabor refunds last year really heavily heading into the election. So I think there will be fair questions asked if ultimately they vote to eliminate them moving forward. Let me ask you one or two more questions, Senator Zenzinger, before I let you go, and then we'll spend the rest of the time here with Senator Simpson. So one of the interesting things about the JBC, and this is a little bit inside baseball, right? It's a 6-member panel. It's bipartisan, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, because Democrats are the majority. You have so much power over how the legislature gets the budget gets written. but 5 of the members this year are brand new to the panel, and I wonder, you're the only one who served on it before. Can you talk about just the struggles and is there a learning curve involved? Are you concerned at all about how that's going to factor into the way that the budget forms this year?
Yes, you're correct. Everything that you said is correct, and it is very stressful. But at the same time, I have been really amazed at every turn how engaged these newer members are. And so even though there is an enormous learning curve, and I only now feel after 3 and 4 years of working on the budget committee that I have like a basic understanding of the budget. But I think the energy that the newer members are bringing to this committee are actually it's a really good thing. They are asking questions that I wouldn't have thought to ask. And that's because they're new with the process. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, well, that sounds weird. Can you explain that? And it does give us an opportunity to sort of reevaluate in a new way through a different lens. Is this really the best choice? I mean, this is the way that we've been doing it for a couple of years. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way to do things. So I'm excited by the energy, and I really feel like I have 5 other really smart, dedicated individuals, and it's going to work out. I also have to admit that we are not doing this by ourselves. We have probably the best nonpartisan JDC staff members in the entire state that are working on this budget, supporting us, answering our questions, digging into the issues. And so I don't feel worried at all.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go eat some good food because I've heard that that event has some nice food. But thank you for joining us so much, Senator Zenzinger. We appreciate it. Senator Simpson, I've got a few more questions for you before I let you go. But
Sure.
Thanks, Senator Zenzinger. I appreciate it.
I didn't know I could call in from the restaurant association. I passed up to go there.
I know.
I wasn't thinking ahead.
I'll give you. I just got a few more minutes for you, and then I'll because our next panel is joining, so maybe I'll let you go a little early. I do want to ask this question because I think it's something that I thought about so much during the redistricting process, and how interesting it is that there are lawmakers who were elected to one district, now represent a new one. Obviously, we were talking about the idea of you were the Rio Grande and Arkansas Valley basin senator. Now you're the Rio Grande and Colorado River Basin senator. You're in the 3rd year of your first term. If you run for re-election in 24, it's going to be a little bit tougher district. How do you manage that? Thinking about new constituents, how did you to deal with that? Hawley to Natarita. It's just there's such different parts of the state. I'm curious, how you approach it and how if it's going to change the way you operate at the legislature.
Jesse, it won't change the way I operate at the legislature. I still recognize who I work for. It's still a different group, but I rely on building. I have a single aide that's helping me, but an aide that will help craft connections for me. So I will go from having like 6 district attorneys in my Senate district in 35 to now I just have 4. But the ability to reach out rather quickly to district attorneys or county commissioners or treasurers or clerk and recorders, that's kind of how I built trying to again represent such a vast district in the first 2 years. I knew when I got elected this was redistricting was going to happen, and look, I think the redistricting commission did exactly what we asked them to do. I don't have any qualms about that, other than I'd asked them, please don't change the name of the district I represent, but they did that anyway. So but I touched on it earlier, Jesse, that it's still very much rural Colorado. We have more in common, even in Senate District 35 than we in Senate District 6 than we have, differences. It's still driven by the same issues and same challenges and same complexities. It's just a new approach at connecting to people. And now driving in the district in the wintertime will be a little more challenging. It means Wolf Creek Pass and Red Mountain Pass and Lizard Head Pass. And it means a lot further for me too. Like when I was going home in my first 2 sessions, when I got home, I was about as far west in the district as I needed to go. And now there's another 100 or plus miles to the west to still go. But I look forward to it. And again, this is only, starting the third year of this process of trying to figure out how to be a really effective legislator. Willing to engage in these opportunities is part of that. I think part of that learning process and learning how to be an effective legislator and reaching out in constituents, whether it's Club 20 and Action 22, local newspapers, radio stations. I really, over the first 2 years, said, and still do this, if somebody asked me to come to an event or speak or be part of a conversation, a panel, if I'm not booked, I'll say yes. And it's driven my wife crazy for a little over 2 years, but I'm still committed to do that, and probably even more so now with a whole set of at least 8 more new counties that had Don Quorum as their senator this time last year. So I look forward to it. I love representing, again, rural Colorado and being a voice for them here under the Gold Dome.
Well, you're certainly known as one of the most bipartisan members of the legislature. So I think that's reflected in the respect that, I can tell that other senators have for you. Let me ask you one last question before I let you go. This session will be dominated by the fact that Republicans are in the minority, a super minority in the House, almost a super minority in the Senate. I mentioned that you're very bipartisan. Does this approach does this change your approach to the legislature at all? You were in the minority before, but now it's kind of a reality that you need a significant number of Democrats to get anything done. How do you approach the political reality you're in?
Look, the approach hasn't changed. You still, take an oath to uphold the Constitution and represent your constituency and work with folks that on issues that are important to Colorado. Again, I'll start in my Senate district, but important to Coloradans about trying to make the place more affordable and we all recognize what the problem is. Like, we've transitioned over the last several years to a place we all didn't want to be, not affordable, high crime rates, challenges in the school, and and again, I know we want the same thing, my Democratic colleagues. So trying to find a space to be productive there, but the trajectory is certainly going the wrong direction. So it's a challenge to kind of hold that up and shine the light on it and go, look, we need a different approach and perspective than historically what we've been doing. And I think that's my role of representing my district and my party about, again, trying to improve the lives of Coloradans. I routinely think about being new to this kind of legislative and political role. At the end of my tenure, how am I going to measure my success? What does success mean? Have I improved the standard of living of my constituents and my fellow Coloradans? And that's kind of what I every day try to think about when I'm in committees or on the floor debating a bill. Or ultimately, I'm really driven by trying to improve the livelihood, the standard of living of Coloradans.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us tonight. I hope you can head over to the Restaurant Association and maybe get some good food before that event shuts down. One of my journalism colleagues suggested that maybe I should do that event from over there. But I really appreciate your perspective. Thanks for sharing what you're thinking and rural Colorado's thinking with us.
Thank you, Jesse. My pleasure. Good night.
Night. So we'll move on now to the last 2 panelists. We've got House Speaker Julie McCluskie, a Dillon Democrat, and the first female or woman speaker from the Western Slope. There hasn't been a speaker from the Western Slope, man or woman, in quite a while. And then we've also got with us Assistant House Minority Leader Rose Pugliese, who is Republican from Colorado Springs, formerly a Mesa County Commissioner. She's got definitely been around in politics for a long time, and it's very unusual to have a first-year lawmaker in leadership. So we'll definitely ask her about that. So since I let Senator Simpson go first, kind of on the spiel about what he wants to do this session, I'll let Speaker McCluskie talk. If you give me just a few minutes about what your priorities are this legislative session and how you're going to approach your first year as Speaker.
Well, thank you, Jesse. It is great to be here tonight, and so appreciate your partnership in helping us spread the word about the good work going on under the big gold dome. we've launched the 74th General Assembly. I am really excited to get to work. We've had a rather turbulent 3 years, a global pandemic, economic shakeup, and I think the investments and the work that we've done the last couple of years has really brought our economy back, and we are thriving. We've seen some unemployment numbers that are almost as low as what we were at just prior to the pandemic. And it's exciting to see people getting back to work and getting back to a sense of normalcy. It might be a new normal, but normalcy all the same. I'm thrilled to be the first woman speaker from the Western Slope. You're right. I think it's been, 20 some years since we had a Western Slope speaker, and very excited that the General Assembly is now woman majority. We're just the second state in the nation to achieve that mark. We're one of the most diverse legislatures in Colorado's history, and I really see that as a strength. An opportunity to better represent the voices of our constituents from across the state and make sure that the policy we craft includes their perspectives, their hopes, addresses their challenges. And I do think it's fair to say that there is still work to do. We know that the cost of living, prices are still too high. While we've made great progress with housing, healthcare, and childcare, I anticipate that housing will still be one of our biggest priorities, healthcare one of our biggest priorities, and we'll continue to focus on childcare, especially the implementation of universal preschool. I also, as you probably heard on opening day, talked a lot about the importance of our environment, the very thing that brings us all to this state, that makes us love this state, is the great outdoors. And particularly when we talk about water, it will be the centerpiece of our conservation conversations, our policy conversations this year, because there is no threat more imminent. And it is truly a moment for all of us to put special interests aside and come together to craft a path forward where Colorado can lead not only for our state, but for the entire Western United States. And as you know, I am passionate about our public schools. I spent more than a dozen years working in Summit School District. And while we've made great progress on funding of our public schools, there is more work to do there. I'm really looking forward to being able to continue those investments in childcare and early childhood education, public schools, and higher education. So I trust that you will be there with us along the way, and we'll get a chance to talk about a lot of these policies as they start to take shape and come into being. But thanks again for having me, and I'm really excited to see our Assistant Minority Leader here tonight. My last comment would be that the Western Slope has a bit of magic when it comes to political work. We so often put the problem first and the party second. We find a way to work together, not thinking about Democrat and Republican, but just what do we need to do to solve the problem for the people we serve. And I know that now Assistant Minority Leader Pugliese had a great reputation for being a Western Slope advocate for the folks in Grand Junction. So what a treat it is for both of us, women with Western Slope roots, now being a part of the leadership team at the Capitol. Yeah,
well, and thank you again for joining us. I will be there along the way. I joked the other day that sometimes I wish there were term limits at the Capitol for journalists, but I haven't come up against those quite yet. This is only my 6th session. So Representative Pugliese, I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit about, your priorities for the session, your first at the Capitol.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for having me as well. And thank you to the speaker for your kind comments. I am really excited to get to work, especially as a freshman. It seems there are definitely a lot of issues where I think we can come together and find some common ground. And I think it's a real opportunity to start some discussions around policies that we all care about. I've been particularly focused on protecting and strengthening children and families, which is something I worked on statewide when I was a county commissioner. And I'm really very grateful for the opportunity to be able to represent Colorado Springs and El Paso County in the legislature. And so I think some of our priorities are really focused on protecting the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I chose to move to Colorado because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And everybody says that's not a true story, but I am telling you that is 100% a true story. We had 3 states we were looking at, and we chose Colorado because I thought any state that allowed their people to vote on tax increases had to be the most free state. And so I really want to focus on making sure that we protect that ability for taxpayers to vote on tax increases. I think that's very important that they're involved and engaged in their government. And we know that we represent them and that we will then use that money appropriately. And so, so that's definitely something that we're really looking at. Obviously, limiting growth of government. We want to look a lot at, when the ARPA funds had come in, there were a lot of programs that had started with that one-time money. And so I think we really just need to keep an eye on that, because we know that the budget's going to be very different this year, and make sure that we are prioritizing the budget according to the proper role of government. So I think that's some of the things we're going to be looking at. I'm very excited to engage with the speaker on housing issues. I think we all understand there's issues there. I think there needs to be definitely more conversation about some different ways to address those issues. But I think that it'll be a really good conversation in our House. And so when I was campaigning and was going door to door, people were really talking about housing prices, affordability, how they were going to manage going to work, and high gas prices, and also feeding their children. I mean, Coloradans don't need to be in that position. And so how can we help with some of those issues? So I think affordability still continues to be an issue, especially with the high rate of inflation. And so I think having some more conversations about that will be really important. Obviously, we're very focused on crime and making sure that we are really protecting victims and having the right legislation in place. So we're going to really focus on that as well. And I'm glad that the speaker brought up environment. I think it's something that we do need to talk about more. I always say, I love living on the Western Slope. I love living in Colorado Springs. I've always been surrounded by mountains in Colorado, and I love that. But we want to make sure, I'm a single mom to 2 young children, and I want to make sure that they have clean air and clean water, and that we can be a leader in having those conversations about the environment. During the COVID pandemic, we had one of the worst wildfires in Colorado's history. And so I think, continuing to have some resources and talking about water and how we mitigate wildfires, I think is really important as a statewide interest. And so I'm definitely excited to roll my sleeves up and start working on some of these issues and dialoguing about it.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you a few questions while we got you unmuted. So it's actually funny when you talk about Tabor. I think about the story of Douglas Bruce coming to Colorado because it was beautiful, which was like, with a lot of the reason that I think a lot of us came, me included. But then, to have it's interesting to hear somebody, be so inspired by Tabor. I know it's kind of it's like the golden beacon for a lot of conservatives. So on the Tabor front, earlier tonight, we were talking with Senator Zenzinger about a bill that she's working on with Representative Kipp that would erase Tabor refunds, or ask voters to forego Tabor refunds and send that money to education. I'm hoping you can talk, maybe just respond a little bit about your reaction to that. And then secondarily, and I'm hoping the speaker can talk about this too, but there's been so much money that went out from the ARPA funds, and it feels like, the money went out, and I'm not sure how much accountability is happening in terms of tracking where those dollars are going. And I wonder if Republicans are interested in that, or Democrats for that matter. So Representative Pugliese, I'll let you go ahead first with that.
Okay, so obviously haven't seen the bill yet that's come out on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights refunds. I know giving people the opportunity to vote on those issues are really important. So I'm glad we're preserving that. I do think that a lot of education needs to happen though around and I've said this for years. I think that county governments have done this, and state government needs to do this as well, is just really look at our budget and reprioritize and see, education is definitely something we should be investing in. But is it really prioritized in our budget? And are there other things that we're funding that really we shouldn't be funding and could be funded outside of state government? And so I think having, looking at the budget and having some real serious conversations about what we should be funding, I think should be the priority before we start taking people's taxpayer bill of rights refunds. Again, I'm glad, if it passes and goes through, I'm glad that people would have the opportunity to vote on that. But I do think preserving taxpayer bill of rights refunds is really important to Coloradans. And I think it's something we should definitely dialogue more about, again, in connection with the budget. And then the second about ARPA funds and accountability, a couple of people have brought that up. It's funny. So one of the committees, we'll see if I can get it, but was that I was really interested in was audit, because I really enjoy digging in. I'm also a lawyer, right, by trade, so I enjoy details, but I really enjoy digging in and asking those tough questions and holding people accountable. And I think we need to do that as citizens and taxpayers of Colorado, but also of the United States. A lot of that money is federal money that went to the federal government and then came back to the states. And so I do think we need to know where that money went and if it was spent appropriately. And so I think those are some great conversations so that we can better Colorado for all of our families.
All right. So Speaker McCluskie, maybe you can talk about both things. Obviously, you talked about education funding. This is an idea from some of your Democratic colleagues they describe it fairly as a Band-Aid solution, given that TABOR refunds don't always exist. You know the budget well. You're former chairwoman of the JBC, and then also maybe I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about those American Rescue Plan Act, federal coronavirus dollars that the state spent over the past 2 years.
Yeah, really good questions. Having come from the world of education, I can say that for far too long, our state has not funded our public schools at the levels we need to. And over the last couple of years, with the strain and stress of the pandemic and the challenges that so many of our classrooms and teachers faced, we're really seeing that challenge in the ability to recruit and retain high qualified educators. There isn't a school district in my big district of 6 counties where I don't hear concerns about funding and the need to be able to pay teachers a living wage in the communities where they live. I've often been asked about TABOR, and especially as a member of the Joint Budget Committee, it is a reality for us here in Colorado. I think for taxpayers to be able to vote on a tax increase, I think that's here to stay. What I would love to review and dig into is the spending cap that, was based on more than 30 years ago, the idea that inflation and population growth should be enough to cover government expenses. I think given that we're, at the bottom of the barrel out of all 50 states in funding public schools and higher education, that we have such growing pressures on our budget from Medicaid and the need to support those safety net services that take care of the most vulnerable Coloradans, I think it's time to revisit how that structure exists. Assistant Minority Leader Pugliese is right. The bill has not yet been introduced. I know that we've talked about debrucing. So many of our counties and school districts have already done that, right? Debrucing is not a new idea, novel idea. The state has just never done it. And I think with the right focus and communicating with voters about the need in very clear and specific data-driven ways, I think there's an argument there to talk about better ways, more sustainable ways of funding public schools. I do think the amount of money that flowed into this state to help us both support Coloradans through the pandemic and then help our economy recover. Great deal of money. The Joint Budget Committee was very thoughtful about our setting up guardrails to be sure that we only did continuous spending authority in the instances where we absolutely had to. We tried to make sure that those accountability measures were built in. And every year, our Joint Budget Committee does a dive into where our previous decisions in operations, services, and programs have delivered results and where they haven't. The one challenge with the ARPA funding is it has an expiration date, a shelf life. So a lot of those dollars just flowing out now since July 1 for, housing, $178 million in funding for rural and urban housing projects. Those dollars need to be expensed, encumbered by in just 2 years. We have to have used those dollars or we return them. And I know that as we were receiving those dollars, we were also working diligently to make sure we knew how to track them, follow them through their life cycle in our budget, and make sure that ultimately they deliver the promises that we have for our constituents and for our state.
All right, I want to unpack two things you said, just because you're speaking fancy language that maybe everyone else doesn't know. But so debrucing basically is just a fancy way of saying allowing government to keep money over the Tabor cap, which is calculated by inflation and population rates. And then when you were talking about, problems with the Tabor cap and how it's calculated, you and I talked about this earlier. And we wrote a story on it. It's one of the most fascinating things, inside baseball, nerdy thing that I've been watching at the Capitol over the past year, is that the inflation rate that's used for the Tabor cap lags 6 months to a year behind, when the money's being spent. So for instance, the current fiscal year dollars are, being spent under a Tabor cap that's at 3% inflation. And right now we know we're in a year where, inflation just ended at 8% or whatever in the last year. So it's a lagging issue. It compounds over time until, inflation catches up. And certainly, there are Democrats and Republicans both who have looked at this over the years. And please let me know if you're introducing a bill in the coming weeks on that. I'd be very interested in it.
I promise I'll let you know.
All right, thank you. So, Madam Speaker, let me stick with you for one more question on this, and I'm kind of curious to Representative Pugliese, given the part of the state that you used to live in. A lot of our readers are asking, have written in tonight about wildfire, mitigation and efforts, and
Yes.
An issue that I just wrote about too, as well, which is problems with getting insurance for people on the Western Slope. I've heard it from family members or family friends, even in kind of the Marshall Fire burn area, they're struggling to get insured, or the prices have gone way up. And I know there's talk about potentially creating an insurer of last resort in Colorado that would be limited, very, very small to people who absolutely cannot get insured by any private companies. Are you part of that conversation with Representative Judy Mobley from Boulder? And also, what other wildfire related steps is the legislature planning on taking this year?
Yeah, Jesse, in Summit County, in just the past 5-6 years, we've had 3 wildfires that, had we not had the immediate response of suppression, may have been catastrophic in the ways that we have seen the East Troublesome Fire, the Cameron Peak Fire, and then again, the Marshall Fire. We are a hotter and drier state. The challenges we face with forests that are dead and dying because of beetle kill, it's extraordinary, this moment. And there are now, every summer day, I wake up to look at what the temperature is going to be and what my fire rating is, right? Is this an extreme fire danger day or not? So everything we can do, both from the mitigation and prevention perspective on wildfire. We've driven a lot of money to help individual homeowners as well as community projects in clearing out and mitigating the wildland urban interface. Buffalo Mountain Fire, which I think was 2016, we had invested $1 million in clearing out dead trees between a number of condominiums up on Buffalo Mountain and the forest. And that cleared area saved hundreds of millions in property just during that brief fire of all of maybe 48, 72 hours. So we know mitigation works and we've made good investments, but clearly a great deal more to do there. We also purchased the Firehawk, an incredibly state-of-the-art firefighting tool. We know aviation resources are critical in those early moments of a fire. Chief Morgan with the Department of Public Safety says, your best moment with a fire are all those before it gets a name. So when you can put the fire out before it has its very own name, you've been successful. And a Firehawk that can get into narrow parts of our mountain areas carry far more water than most helicopters can, hoping that'll be another tool in the toolkit in battling wildfire. And then, of course, being ready with suppression, response, and recovery in those tough moments. We've invested in watershed recovery, certainly wanting to make sure that we do all we can after a fire to protect our water resources. We've pulled down federal funding to match state dollars to be able to do that. And particularly in the East Troublesome fire area, I did a helicopter tour over that burn scar. And, you know, when you don't quickly stabilize the ground floor of that forest, you can have flooding. We had lost life because of a mudslide in there. So really important that we pay attention to that recovery. As far as insurance, yes, I am working with Representative Amabile. She and I will be bringing forward legislation that will provide kind of that safety net insurance product for those who are unable to get it. I do know that the Commissioner of Insurance has really encouraged people to take the time and shop. We don't want to quickly, it's been a challenge in our mountain communities. I've talked to so many HOAs about, you know, being sure that they are looking at every possible product, but I think there is a need for that type of insurance product that is available to everyone in these situations. So yes, look for that. And I think there'll be more on the wildfire front. Often it's a need of resources. And I will say that Congressman Neguse, part of our congressional delegation, has really been an excellent partner in trying to help us bridge the divide between state and federal resources and draw down more money for us here in Colorado on all those different wildfire fronts.
Yeah, with the Buffalo fire is an interesting example, you know, where mitigation, you know, the $1 million fire break, I remember touring that right after it happened. And
did you?
Yeah, and we included in the story about the bill that you're apparently working on. I guess it was still in progress. You know, interesting to hear that it's definitely coming. You know, that the folks in a condominium right there, you know, they try to get insurance even with this fire break. And they were told it was going to be like a couple $100,000, and then the insurer dropped them when they like realized how bad the wildfire risk was, and then came back and said their annual rate was going to be $1 million, you know, for a 270 unit building that ends up being about $7,000, $8,000 per unit, which obviously is very high.
Yes.
So Representative Pugliese, I talked to Mark Baisley, you know, Senator Mark Baisley, Republican from Woodland Park, about this issue. He said, and I was kind of interested or surprised to hear a Republican say this, that he thinks the state does have a role to play, you know, when it comes to providing the insurance of last resort. Are you on the same page? I think you do represent the Mountain Shadows community. Maybe that's a little further south. Okay, right. So affected by the Waldo Canyon fire, obviously a part of the state that's still very prone to wildfire. Does the state have a role here to help, you know, ensure that homeowners can get and find insurance?
I definitely think it's an interesting conversation that obviously we want to be able to dialogue about. I think wildfire mitigation is really important, and making sure we take as many steps on a statewide level to prevent wildfires as possible, I think is really important. I think the speaker, I have nothing to add to what the speaker said on all the different avenues that we have to be able to do that. Obviously, if the state were to get involved, it would have to be, there was no other private option for insurance. And having previously lived in Florida on the beach, I kind of understand that from that perspective. So anyway, I think I would love to have some more conversation about what that looks like, and also visit with my Republican caucus members about their perspective and see how we can get engaged in this issue.
Yeah, Florida is a good example. Some insurance industry folks would say it's a bad example of how that insurance, state-run insurance program worked out. But you know, it's an interesting thing. We wrote a little bit about it, and hoping if folks want to find the story, again, I'm a better writer than I am a talker. So, okay, so staying with you, Representative Pugliese, and this is a situation that's going to affect you guys both. You know, the House has been rowdy in recent years. And, you know, we saw a little bit of that earlier in the week when there was a Republican nominated for Speaker, which was a little untraditional given that there's a, you know, Democratic majority in the chamber. Typically, it's a unanimous vote. There was some interesting back and forth among Republicans. There's a lot of new lawmakers in the House. I think about half of the lawmakers in the House are brand new to the legislature. You're obviously one of them. How do you and those other lawmakers navigate kind of being new to the Capitol? And how do you, manage being in the super minority? There's a lot of voices in your caucus, people who want to work with Democrats, people who don't want to work with Democrats. As a member of leadership in your first year, talk about approaching this kind of situation.
Yes. I have a lot of respect for every single member of our caucus. We campaigned together, we've worked hard together, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity ahead for us to talk about the issues that are important to Coloradans and really look at statewide perspective. And so from that respect, I will say there was a rumor that the House was more fun than the Senate. So I feel like in my 3 days, the House is more fun from what I've seen. So I think there's just more personalities and I think more lived experiences, which I'm incredibly excited to share in and get to know my fellow members in my own caucus, and for us to all kind of get to know each other, right, and know where we're from, what we stand for. Who our children are, right? I mean, we're all doing this. I was talking to someone the other day and I said, my daughter had a fever. I was up with her all night and then I had to leave at 6 a.m. to get to the Capitol, right? Like that's real life. And being able to share that with members of my caucus, but there are also some Democrats that are also living those experiences. And so being able to talk to them as well, I think that really we are all working towards a better life for all Coloradans. And so what does that look like? Let's have some civil conversations. I think our goals are, aligned in a lot of ways. And our caucus is aligned. I want that message to be very clear. Republicans tend to be very independent and strong, and so I have a lot of respect for that on our side of the aisle. And I think that we've got a lot of great opportunity. I have a record of getting things done statewide. And I've done that by building relationships. And I'm very proud of the relationships I have with grassroots on the Republican side, but I also found during the national popular vote repeal that there were Democrats and unaffiliateds that I could also work with as we were pushing forward a common goal. And so I hope to be able to use those skills to continue to push forward good policy for Colorado families. And I'm just really excited at the opportunity to work with everyone in the House. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're one person, who talks about wanting to work with Democrats a lot. I guess my question is, do Republicans at some point run the risk of giving Democrats a reason to not bother? Like, there is goodwill, and I think Democrats want to work with Republicans. Obviously, they have the majority, so they want to get their policies passed. But do Republicans have some kind of responsibility if they would like to, be part of the conversation to maybe accept the olive branch and return it in some ways?
I think it's a big learning curve, right? I mean, there's a lot of new people trying to navigate this process, still trying to understand how everything works. I think we're all trying to work together, and I think that's really amazing. And while I'm a freshman in the legislature, I'm not new to the legislative process. I've been very engaged throughout my whole 8 years as a county commissioner. And so I think that we've got a lot of good opportunity. And so I will say the speaker has been incredibly generous, as has the minority leader, especially with me, but in trying to help navigate and really engage in dialogue. Now, there are going to be issues, and we know that, and we've been very open about that, right? I'm sure there's things I've said today or things that the speaker has said that we're like, we're not going to get there. But I think having those honest conversations, right? I think that's really what it's about. Standing for, on our side, our conservative principles and making sure our constituents know that we are representing them. I think that's what's important. But thus far, I feel like we've had a great working relationship. I feel like at least we're invited to have conversations at the table. And I appreciate that, because as we were working for all of Colorado. We work for my constituents. We work for Speaker McCluskie's constituents, right? We work for all Coloradans across the state. And so I think engaging in those dialogues are really important. And so I think that, again, we've got a great opportunity to work on some really good issues. And I do think there are some issues that are bipartisan, especially around children and families. I think that there's definitely some common ground to find.
All right, and we're going to go a little over here, but Speaker McCluskie, talk about working with Republicans, trying to keep things on task. Nobody has called the question and again, this is a little bit insidery, but shut down debate to kind of move things forward. Would that be a tool you'd use? And then for your own caucus, you've got some very progressive members in your own caucus who want to bring the caucus further left. I think you're known as a center left, maybe a little bit more moderate lawmaker. There's certainly moderate voices in your caucus. How do you unite your own caucus and also try and work with Republicans, keep everybody on task? You've got a tough job ahead of you.
Thanks, Jesse. I want to start first by acknowledging Monday. I think it's really important to note that Monday's election of a speaker is honoring the institution, honoring that we all come there to fulfill the contract with voters and deliver on democracy. And I am really delighted and pleased that we were focused on that and ultimately moved forward, had this wonderful celebration with a House that is more diverse than ever before. Voters did affirm that Democrats are on the right path. They expanded our majority. I think that's recognition that our hard work and the accomplishments of the past few years ring true with many Coloradans. But you heard it in my speech on Monday, and I am very committed to working in a bipartisan way. I am responsive now and responsible to voters that said yes for me and voters that did not. It is incredibly important to have all voices at the table as we craft policy. If we want policy to be long-lasting and enduring, to ignore our Republican colleagues is shameful. More than 90% of our bills, probably even higher than that, end up with Democrat and Republican votes. We generally find common ground to move good policy forward. And thank you, Assistant Minority Leader Pugliese. When we don't find that common ground, it is still important that we engage in the dialogue. We've been talking a lot in our caucus about authentic engagement. What does that mean? It means listening to one another within the caucus. It means listening across the aisle, and certainly listening to constituents and stakeholders, groups and organizations that advocate for certain policy perspectives or have hopes about the work we do here. I don't doubt we will have moments where we disagree. I hope that as Speaker, I can lead our House in an orderly way, that we can have those conversations honestly, not with reading bills at length, but talking to one another and debating issues, really hearing and understanding, and then being willing to move when we need to on either side. So it's going to be an exciting year. I have no doubt. I think we are committed to serving all Coloradans. I am excited by the energy I see in the building right now, the enthusiasm for this good and important work. And I'm ready to kind of get our groove on, get going. We have so many celebrations the first 5-10 days of session, so many people to hear from. I hope you were there to hear from the tribal council leaders today. That was a really special moment. The Ute, Mountain Ute and Southern Ute tribal leaders were with us today, shared their perspectives, voices that have not been heard in our chamber before. I thought that was really powerful. We have State of the State next Tuesday, a chance to hear from our governor. It's an exciting time. So hopefully, we will get into the business at hand starting next week. But for now, it really is a celebration.
All right, well, we'll be there. The Colorado Sun will be there for all of it. If you want to read a little bit about the address today from the Southern Ute and you, Mountain U chairman, we had a good story on it, some interesting perspective that they brought. It's certainly really fascinating. I want to thank you both so much for joining us and for having such a great conversation and sharing, your perspectives. It's great to hear from different parts of the state and, different sides of the aisle. And thank you for engaging and providing such thoughtful answers. To everyone else who joined us tonight, thank you so much for all the Colorado Sun readers and Colorado Sun members. If you're not a member already, it's quick and easy to join at coloradosun.com/join. Become an unaffiliated or a premium member to get our unaffiliated newsletter to find out what's going on behind the scenes with these two and the other 98 lawmakers in the Capitol that we keep track on. Thank you again to our sponsors for tonight, Ponte and Busam. And again, thank you so much to our panelists, everyone who joined us. We really had a good time.